Hey, what's up, everyone? Entering Infinity here. Today I'm back with a new episode, and today we're going to talk about My Hero Academia, episode 90. Let's jump into it. Alright, so episode 90 starts out with Endeavor in the hospital still. He has another flashback to the moment after he defeated the Nomu, where him and Hawks were there kind of recovering, and Dabi shows up, and they kind of square off a bit, and Dabi starts to attack. Hawks is about to, try to fight him, even though, again, I don't think he could. And another hero kind of steps in and pretty much saves them. She kind of comes in and smashes the ground, and, Dabi has to kind of retreat a bit. He basically just says that he was there to collect the Nomu, and he's not really there for a fight. So he calls out something called Ujiko, and then this black goo, comes out and, takes him away. Pretty weird. I don't think we've seen that yet before, so curious to know more about what that is. So then he leaves, and then that was pretty much the end of that flashback. Then it cuts to, again, that scene that we saw at the end of the last episode where Hawks meets up with Dabi in the building, and they kind of have a little rendezvous there, and they basically talk, and Hawks tells him that he didn't follow the plan, and then Dabi says that he told him it was supposed to be a Nomu kind of training exercise. It was supposed to happen in a different place, so they were kind of going at it a little bit. And at this point, you're like, wow, is Hawks actually betraying them and is actually working as a spy against the heroes? You could certainly tell that there was certainly a big level of distrust that Dabi has with Hawks, because he doesn't really believe that he's really turning on them. So that's why he didn't really follow the plan exactly how he is, because they're sneaky and evil, so they're not going to always do things according to plan. So we have a nice little interesting exchange there, and then Dabi says he'll be in touch and that Hawks isn't ready to meet the boss yet. So that's pretty interesting. Really curious to see what's going to happen. Probably when we get to that point where Hawks goes and meets the leader of the League of Villains. That's going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out. For him to actually go into a lair and be that kind of exposed is going to be pretty crazy. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. So then it pretty much cuts to this executive room where these two higher ups that I guess manage the heroes. I'm not sure that we've even seen them before, but they seem like these board members or top executives that run the hero organization, and they're talking to Hawks, and they're basically asking him to go undercover as a spy in the League of Villains, so that way they can kind of learn more about them and help to defeat them. And they kind of pretend like Hawks has a choice, and he's basically throws it back in their face and tells them, you talk as if it's just a proposition, but I really don't even have a choice in the matter, which is pretty mean. So they pretty much force him to do this. What I really find interesting with that whole situation is that they didn't tell Endeavor, which is pretty bizarre to me, since Endeavor's a new #1 hero, and you're gonna run this covert mission and not even tell him is pretty insane to me, because I feel like if that was All Might, he would have been in the loop at that. So I'm wondering if maybe they have a certain level of distrust with Endeavor as well. But yeah, I was pretty shocked to see that they didn't include him or anybody else. So I'm really curious as to the reasoning for that, and if they'll end up kind of diving more into it. But it was also kind of interesting how they just immediately cut to that, because at first you're questioning his loyalty, then it immediately kind of jumps and pretty much assures you that he's acting as a double agent and he's not really turning against them. So I'm surprised they did it that quick without kind of leaving it open-ended as a mystery. But again, you still have to wonder if maybe he is playing the hero side, and maybe he is truly evil. So who really knows? But if I had to guess, I think he's still a good guy. So then it cuts to Endeavor getting out of the hospital, and Hawks is there with him, and they're walking home, and they're kind of having an interesting conversation. And Endeavor, you could tell, has just been really kind of replaying the events of what happened in his mind over and over again, because he's really kind of shook by it and racking his brain by it. And he tells Hawks, he's like, do you really think that was a coincidence? It came straight for us, and it knew exactly where they were. So clearly he has some level of suspicion that he thinks that it could have been somebody, who was a traitor in the heroes that sold them out. Or I think to a certain degree that he does suspect Hawks, because there is definitely some level of distrust there, and I think that he is pretty skeptical of him. So again, I don't understand why they wouldn't include him in that conversation to let him know that he was going undercover, because it's just pretty insane to me that they wouldn't do that, and it pretty much leaves Hawks exposed, because now heroes might feel a certain way about him, that they think that Hawks is betraying them, but in reality he's not, and eventually could come to a situation where not having that information could cause a serious problem and potentially even get somebody killed. So I really don't understand the reasoning for that, and I really hope that they kind of dive into that a little more, because I feel like Endeavor is going to be really pissed when he finds out at the end of it that they never told him about that. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And then we get a little flashback of Hawks when he was a little kid and he had saved a bunch of people. I'm not sure if that kind of had a bigger significance because I didn't really remember exactly what that situation was that they were referring to where he saved those people, and they didn't really expand on it that much. But I love the fact that you got to see him being a little kid and he was holding a little Endeavor toy. I thought that was so funny, and I thought that part was really cool, just to kind of see that, and that he obviously really does look up to Endeavor a lot, but he has to like play it cool. But I bet on the inside he's just like really fanboying out and probably is like so hyped that he gets to work with Endeavor. And I'm really glad that they did address my question in the previous 2 episodes regarding whether or not he still has his eye, and I'm glad that they, decided to not remove his eye and that it was still intact. But he does have like a really bad scar left over like across his like left eye, so that's pretty interesting now that he has to live with that kind of scar, I'm pretty sure. And now we'll see kind of how that plays out moving forward, but I'm really happy that they did not get rid of his eye, because I think that would have just been so stupid, only have him have one eye going forward at this point in the story. So I'm certainly happy with that decision there. And then we get to see Endeavor arriving home to his family, which was essentially his daughter, I forget her name, and then Todoroki and the brother, I think his name was Natsuo, and they're having like a little lunch or a dinner or something, and it was supposed to be like a welcome home party. It certainly had a air of awkwardness and tension in the air, obviously, because the kids feel a certain way about him, and then he's kind of awkward around them because of kind of all their history boiled up, and the tensions were so high. But the daughter was trying so hard to just have like a nice little like get together and welcome home party, but Natsuo like wasn't having it, and he basically said that he's not willing to forgive him all of a sudden for everything he did just by beating one enemy, which I totally understand. I mean, there's so much layers of pain there that he's not able to just kind of forgive everything at the drop of a hat, so it's totally understandable. So he kind of storms out. But what I did like was that Todoroki actually not only showed up, but he actually stayed there, and he said that he's open to kind of seeing how Endeavor has changed, and I think that was, again, really good character development for him, because I think, previously he wouldn't have even shown up or given him the time of day at all, and we're starting to see that he's now open to forgiving him and at least learning about who he's all about now, and about how he's learning, what type of man Endeavor wants to be going forward, and he's willing to see kind of how he's going to treat his family and how he's going to do things differently. So I think that's a really great character development for Todoroki, and I'm really loving that plot line, and I'm really curious to see how it's going to continue to develop going forward. And then during the meal, they have the news on, and this part was like pretty interesting. It was like the news reporter was talking about how, people were reacting to that fight with Endeavor versus the Nomu. They were interviewing different like random people on the street, and it was like really funny, and they kind of had mixed reactions still, but the general public is starting to move towards liking Endeavor more, because there's so much distrust there with him, because just how he kind of acts almost like Bakugo, in the sense that you almost kind of feel like he's a villain sometimes because of like how he acts, and he's not all like gung-ho and the way All Might is, and how he carries himself. They're just such different characters, and people are starting to come around to accepting him as the number one hero. But there is still a certain level of distrust in the public, because people were like, in the interviews, they were saying how they've defeated Nomu so many times and it almost defeated the number one hero, so basically insinuating that they're kind of screwed. But I don't think they fully understand just how powerful that Nomu was, and how they only just keep getting more and more powerful as the time goes on, and the general public is too stupid to know how strong they really are. They just think they're all like weak. So it's kind of unfair criticism for Endeavor, but it's nice to see that the general public is definitely starting to kind of shift towards him, and that's thanks to that one kid that looks exactly like Natsu from Fairy Tail, and how he was kind of yelling into the camera saying that he's like, look, he's giving up everything to like save us and fight for us, and he kind of like turned the general public's opinion towards him when the fight was actually happening, when everyone was starting to give up, and they basically like turned him into a meme and like put him on mugs and t-shirts and stuff, and like I thought that was like absolutely hilarious, like a parody over us in real life, how like we just turn like random things into memes and just make them famous over like stupid reasons. So I kind of thought that was pretty funny, but I'm glad that it helped Endeavor kind of get more favorability in the public eye. Then the last sequence we get to see is Deku. He's, exhausted from his training, and he pretty much just passes out in his bed. And his ability One for All pretty much causes him to have a dream, and he gets to see all the previous, holders of One for All the previous heroes that came before him. And I thought that was really interesting because they did tease this at the end of the last season, and I think it's a really interesting topic that I can't wait to, dive into more of. And we get to see a little bit of, who they all looked like, and then we get to see a flashback of who I'm assuming is the first holder of One for All. He was the brother of All for One, and we get to actually see him like sort of actually look like a human instead of like the weird kind of monstrosity that he looks like now. And it kind of gives you more background. It's really interesting because it almost made you kind of sympathize with him a little bit, because like we're told that he's like so evil and all this stuff, but what we saw in the flashback, he was kind of doing like some nice things for people, and yeah, he was using it as a way to like manipulate and leverage them, but to a certain degree what he did was actually kind of helping people. So you really kind of wonder, what really the full story is around him, because they showed this one guy who his quirk pretty much made him, deformed and scary looking, and his own family like pretty much casted him aside because of his quirk. And then they had another guy who had no quirks, and he got like jumped and beat up by a bunch of people that had quirks, so he really wanted a quirk. And then in contrast, the other guy didn't want his quirk, so All for One helped these two people out by taking and absorbing the one quirk from the guy that didn't want it and giving a quirk to the other guy. I don't think he passed over the same one. I think he gave him a new quirk that was different, but he gave the guy who wanted one a quirk, and I thought that was really cool to kind of see the depth of that power and how he kind of does that. So again, in a way, I mean, he did help those two people out a lot and gave them something that they otherwise couldn't have gotten. But afterwards, he pretty much told them, if I ever need you, like, you'll help me, right? So pretty much he's like now kind of going to pull them by the puppet string. So he is very manipulative, but at least he, didn't do anything super evil. I mean, he could just go around and steal people's, quirks and just kill them. But what he did in a certain way, you could look at it as him kind of helping people. So that was definitely interesting, because I'm curious to see kind of more into that. And then we really get to see kind of the interaction between the two brothers, and how All for One's brother was like really sick and frail, and he was like the exact opposite and trying to tell him that he was evil and he needs to stop doing what he's doing. Then All for One tells him that he found a quirk that even he can use since he's so weak and frail, so he's going to make him like go help him look for it or something. So that was pretty interesting to see kind of the background of that. And then while that's going on, Deku's basically like, you only see part of his body and the rest of it's kind of like a ghost. And my guess is that because he only has 20% of his quirk kind of tapped into, that you only see 20% of his body. I think that's the reasoning for that. And we actually get to see that kind of interaction after that flashback. The brother, who was what I'm assuming is the original holder of One for All, he kind of interacts with Deku for a moment, and he basically tells him, you've only tapped into 20% of the power, and you're not alone, we're here for you. So it was kind of interesting. I think that he was pretty much just saying that, as he taps more and more into One for All's power, that he'll kind of learn more and kind of be able to kind of see the bigger picture. So that was really cool and interesting. I think that was like a really cool plot line, and it'll only help serve to kind of develop Deku more as a character, and we'll kind of see, if they help him tap more into those powers, or if that's kind of all for Deku to do on his own under kind of the guidance of All Might. And then once he taps into it more, is that when they're going to kind of help him and show him more stuff? So I'm kind of curious to see how that all plays out. But I would love to see, more flashbacks of the other holders of One for All, because I think it's like really interesting how, they all pass it on to each other, and it's such a powerful quirk that I would love to see kind of, other people using it, and how they kind of got to the point where they had to pass it on, whether it was from old age and they were retiring, or because they got overpowered and defeated by something. I think that would make for probably a really cool movie, if not a flashback within the regular series. But again, I think that was a really cool plot line. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I mean, it was a very dialogue heavy and exposition heavy episode, but again, I think it is really driving the plot forward and giving us really interesting context and background information. We got to see kind of character development with Todoroki and Endeavor. We got to see kind of Hawks and him kind of being forced to be like 007 and play like a double agent and infiltrate the enemies. We got to see Deku and him having his dream and tapping into his power, and kind of seeing a flashback with All for One and his brother, and kind of see, see kind of where his powers come from. So a lot of really cool things going on, and I'm really curious to see how these all pay off going forward. Yeah, and based on the preview for next week, it looks like our Class 1A is going to be doing some combat training with Class 1B. So I always love to see them fight and kind of get to use their quirk. So it's going to be a pretty fun episode. Supposedly a special character that's going to be making an appearance there. So I'm curious to see who that is. And I'm hoping that we get to see some new cool uses of the quirks that we haven't seen before as they continue to develop their abilities. So it's going to be a fun one, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. So that's all I have for this one. So if you enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what did you think of this episode, and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll catch you all in the next one.